What's up, guys? Thanks so much for checking in with the channel again today. We're back with another in our Birthright faction review or domain review series here, and we're continuing on with the domains of the Western Coast here. And so we have one of the two big NPC domains here, and that is Rove, which is related to Rove the Elf, one of the big Anshe or big bads of the setting here. So let's take a dive in and see what is all going on with Rove. And again, this one is neutral evil and not available for PCs, and this is a one province domain with a level of 2/9, which is quite unusual. Certainly not going to be super well populated. The elves don't have that many numbers, at least that the human kingdoms nearby know about, but the magical potential there is just off the charts. And when we cover Rove separately in a separate video, we will dive a little bit more in depth into his history and his capabilities, just as in sort of a potent NPC and sort of one of the big bad guys of the setting. So that is all that's really going on in the kingdom. So he controls all of the law. There are no temples or guilds. And sources, well, with him being a fighter and mage, he controls all of that as well. So the exact levels of those holdings are unknown, which gives the DM a little bit more flexibility with what he wants to do there. It should be mentioned too, one of the other sort of published adventures, I believe it was Sword and Crown, does eventually take you into this territory, and that's a great one for some extra information as well. So the regent here, we'll start there. So the land of Rove takes its name from Rove the elf, called Manslayer, and one of the original Anshalian. One of the few elves who did not renounce Azrai at Deismar, so he absorbed a goodly part of the god's essence, quite a bit actually, and now rules a tiny domain wedged between Tuornen, Tegas, and Borowin. And it's one of the last elf lands in the Elven Woad, and Rove seeks to expand his territory. So, fortunately for everyone else, because he's basically surrounded on all sides, he can't really risk, at least currently, really engaging any one territory, because for that, the human kingdoms would essentially, I think, at least temporarily, band together to contain any of his rampages. So the elf hates all humans, even more so now than when he joined forces with evil. He goes out of his way to kill any human he can, man, woman, or child, but especially regents. And that's where, if you are a regent, you do need to be a little bit extra careful. So investing in like a bodyguard or 2 or 20 might be worthwhile. He sees himself as a protector of the forest and guardian of a lost elven way of life, and takes an active part in destroying the Anuirians around him. He is willing to work with humans, but only to cause even greater harm to them eventually. He always betrays those who have allied themselves with him. So also something to keep in mind should you ever be in a position to make any kind of deal with him. So a fierce opponent, he remains unflinching in his dedication to returning Cerelia to the elves. He has lived for well over 1,000 years now, and his outlook toward the human encroachers grows steadily worse with each passing year. He broods in the tower Rhuobhe, a single blackened spire that rises high above the forest around it, and he formulates his plans of destruction. So the card sheet, as it says here, will have more information on this abomination, which we'll cover again in a separate video. As far as lieutenants go, he has no lieutenants as such, but basically anyone in his forces could work as a lieutenant. So in that sense, he has potentially thousands of lieutenants. So in essence then, right, he has, as it says here, a small army, basically to deal with any of the problems that might arise. So really, in that sense, that could be an interesting threat for nearby regions. You might deal with one of his lieutenants, maybe even kill them. He basically has an infinite supply of willing comrades that could act as a lieutenant. So just something to keep in mind there. So it might seem like a minor victory if you happen to encounter, maybe even kill off one of his lieutenants, but that's probably just going to piss him off further and draw extra attention to you on his part, and really you've essentially accomplished nothing. So consider Rove 2/9, at once both a kingdom and a province. It is as developed as any elf land, so that is to say hardly at all. So there's no cities, temples, or guilds, basically. So in that sense, it's kind of hard to target anything that's necessarily important to him. He does just have that one tower, essentially, that's anything as far as landmarks go. So only Rove has any stake in his own land. Though some people certainly would love to influence him, none of those who try actually live long enough to do so. Folks call him the Manslayer for good reason, and he does not negotiate with humans, at least not seriously. He plays at diplomacy solely for his own amusement, but he has sent back far too many diplomats' heads for any regent to seriously consider any ambassadorial missions to his realm. So something that you shouldn't really waste your time trying. You're just going to lose people basically. So, and best not to really draw attention to yourself from him. So, a little bit more on the description here. So he is situated between Borroween and Tuornen directly, but he also borders on Tagas and Avenel. So the two immensely strong kingdoms on either side of the realm are all that basically keep him from taking the Elven woad back from the humans. The other kingdoms are certainly much weaker and don't really have the standing armies to deal with him, or the regions certainly aren't that capable either. Likewise, the fact that he controls the major outlet through the mountains, Clearwater Pass, is the only thing that keeps Avenel and Borroween from attacking each other outright. So, in that sense, something that can be played off as far as DMs go, something to keep in mind there. So, something you could play off against the other NPCs as well. And that could be a point of contention where, depending on if you're allied with Borroween or Avenel, that might be a task that is set to you, but again, good luck. As far as taking that pass and clearing that. The truly beautiful land of Rove possesses an undercurrent of savagery, outlined in the very posture of the trees. It's as undeveloped a country as a traveler might chance upon, though the elves carefully tend the trees to keep them green and healthy even through the freezing western winters. The tower Rhuobhe sits on the shores of Clearwater Lake, which casts back a reflection of the tower in a more pristine state. The lake is fed by pure mountain streams that pour down from the sea mist mountains into Rove. A group of fewer than 1,000 elves has stuck by him throughout his long years. Those who are killed are replaced by their children, and some say that elves from Tuar Hievel and the Sealwoad come to learn the ways of hatred to take back to their people. So, again, elves in this setting are quite a bit different than your typical elves in some of your more common settings like Forgotten Realms and stuff like that. So, quite xenophobic. But we'll cover a little bit of more of the history in another series of videos as well. The elves of Rove, though civilized and proud, share the goal of Rove himself, so basically driving the humans from the land. The highest honor they reserve for one who kills a human of noble blood. War parties occasionally steal out to raid human lands. It's said that tunnels into the Sea Mist Mountains, leading all the way to Tuar Hievel, hold still more of Rove's elves. Some even whisper that the elves are in league with the Orogs and goblins under the mountains. So if you remember back to our sort of intro video to the Western Coast here, so that's a couple of the major sort of plot or rumor points, and really something that probably a DM would like or should connect and sort of work on, so that you might not initially suspect Rove, or your players shouldn't necessarily. But you can certainly sort of start that as the initial threat, but then perhaps uncover sort of the deeper mystery behind these increasing Orog, troll, goblin, whatever attacks, and then that might lead you up into the mountains and into any like tunnels or anything, and eventually potentially back into Rove, and then that knowledge of that could then lead to other bigger adventures. And really, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to say that you took out Rove Manslayer? And quite a tall order, and would be a nice little surprise too for players who might get a little bit confident in seeing that there maybe aren't that many elves, and that he's been using these monsters as sort of a buffer to make up for his numbers, when then really maybe a larger human force is lured into here, but then suddenly a few extra thousand elves come pouring out of tunnels all over the place, and that leads to potentially a massacre and stuff like that. So it could be a really fun adventure. So overall, unfortunately, there's not that much listed here in the sort of the main entry for Rove, but again, there's fertile ground here for adding additional things, and really, I think as the DM, working again that angle, so up and down the Sea Mist Mountains, no matter which domain you're really playing and bordering, as long as they're close to those mountains, you certainly have the ability to play up the sort of the monster threat, whether it's Orogs or anything worse. And again, sort of leading either PC rulers of domains into tackling that problem. And again, we've kind of illustrated that as a plot point for some of the other kingdoms so far. or again, if you're just adventuring and not playing the sort of running a domain version of Birthright, that's fertile adventuring ground right there. So, and could be doubly interesting too if maybe one of the party members is something like a half elf. There's fertile ground there to really make that some tough decisions when it comes to the point of um, meeting up with elves directly, and potentially even Rove himself, which again, hopefully you have something of a decent enough level. If any kind of combat were involved, again, we'll cover Rove and his stats and all that in detail in a separate video. But he is basically one of the top bad guys, at least in this sort of standard setting of Anawir and the surrounding lands. So he's definitely right up there. Not quite the Gorgon's power level, but I would say a close second, at least in this, before we get into any of the other expansions. And again, when we review Sword and Crown, which is an adventure, if I recall, about 4 to 6 level players, as it suggested, that eventually leads you into this territory itself, and I think even a confrontation with Rove himself. So we'll kind of tie that back into the domain description here, but that's definitely another one that's worth picking up if you want a little bit more description of his territory, and actually adventuring in there, and his tower, and other sort of a direct encounter with him, with the man himself or the elf himself. Again, extra stuff that is out there. You just kind of got to tie it together, but definitely a great one for the DM to work, and with it bordering so many other domains on the surface. But again, you can play up the underground battle as well, and the connections there. So really, the sort of tendrils of this territory and this NPC can stretch far and wide, and really just about as far and wide as the DM really wants to do it. And would be interesting too if, using the underground tunnel network and things like that, you could certainly fool and mislead players for quite some time, depending on how far away their domains are from Rove's actual territory, until they might finally get some clues that lead them a little bit more towards him and some of the other intrigues and stuff that are going on the West Coast. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Leave us some comments. If you could, have you played in and around Rove's domain? Have you dealt with him as a domain ruler of any kind? What have your successes or failures been? Have you adventured there? Have any of you stood up to him? What have your, again, results been? And from there, hope you guys could leave us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for stopping by.